My mother-in-law was standing at the marble counter of First Harbor Bank when I walked in carrying the program from my own funeral. My photograph covered the front page. Beneath it, in careful silver lettering, were the dates of my birth and supposed death. Across the lobby, Evelyn Mercer slid a folder toward the branch manager. A certified death certificate rested on top, bearing my full name, my social security number, and a county seal that looked real from 10 feet away. The manager glanced at the document, then lifted his eyes. He knew me. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, gripping the edge of the counter, "the woman whose estate you're closing is standing behind you." Evelyn turned. For the first time since I had married her son 17 years earlier, she had no expression prepared for me. Her hand moved instinctively over the folder, not toward me, toward the papers. That was when I understood that the funeral had not been an act of grief based on a terrible misunderstanding. The empty casket, the white roses, the stories she had told about my final hours, none of it had been arranged because she believed I was dead. She had needed other people to believe it. And she had brought proof. 3 hours earlier, I had arrived home expecting to surprise my 15-year-old daughter Sophie. I had spent 12 days working as a flight nurse with a disaster response medical team after severe flooding isolated several rural communities. On our return trip, the transport van carrying 4 of us had been struck at an intersection outside Little Rock. My phone was destroyed, my wallet disappeared during the transfer between hospitals, and the medication reaction kept me unconscious for almost 2 days. By the time I was able to give the hospital staff my correct information, someone had already reported me missing. I called home repeatedly after that. No answer from Sophie. No answer from Evelyn. The only person who responded was my neighbor, Lila Grant, who whispered, "Mara, where are you?" When I said I was at the bus terminal, she began crying. Then she told me there were cars outside the church. She drove me there without explaining anything else. I arrived as people were leaving the sanctuary. Some carried flowers. Others held copies of the same program now folded in my hand. When they saw me beside Lila's car, conversation stopped in uneven waves. One woman crossed herself. My former nursing supervisor dropped her purse. Inside the church, a closed gray casket sat beneath a framed photograph of me in my blue flight uniform. There was no body inside. Evelyn had told everyone the remains were too badly damaged for viewing and would be cremated privately. Sophie was nowhere in the building. Evelyn was gone too. An usher remembered seeing her leave with a leather document case and said she had mentioned an appointment at the bank. So I followed. Now she stood between me and the branch manager, her face drained but her voice steady. "You shouldn't be here," she said. It was not shock, it was accusation. "Where is Sophie?" "She's safe." "Where?" Evelyn looked at the manager instead of answering. "Mr. Feldman, this woman has been missing for nearly 2 weeks. She was injured, she may be confused." Mr. Feldman stepped away from the folder. "I spoke to Mara at this desk last month," he said. "She is a customer here." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the leather case. "Then call the police." "I already have," he replied. I should have waited quietly. My training had taught me to slow down during emergencies, identify the immediate threat, and avoid contaminating information before it could be documented. Instead, I made my first mistake. I reached across the counter and pulled the death certificate toward me. My address was correct. My mother's maiden name was correct. Even the last 4 digits of my social security number were correct. The stated cause of death was injury sustained in the van collision. At the bottom was a signature from a physician I had never met. Beside the certificate lay a notarized request to release funds from an education account I had created for Sophie after my husband died. The requested transfer was for nearly everything in it. But that was not the detail that frightened me most. The form had been prepared 8 days before my accident. Evelyn had not taken advantage of my disappearance. She had been waiting for one. The police separated us before Evelyn could explain why a transfer request had been dated 8 days before the collision. One officer took her into a glass-walled office beside the vault. Another asked me to sit near the entrance and describe where I had been since leaving for the flood deployment. I answered as clearly as I could, but my eyes kept returning to the leather case on the counter. It had belonged to my husband, Daniel. He carried it during the final year of his life, when hospital appointments and insurance forms had begun replacing ordinary plans. After he died from pancreatic cancer, I gave the case to Evelyn because she said it contained family documents she wanted to preserve. "I had not seen it in 6 years, Mr. Feldman brought me water and lowered his voice. Your mother-in-law tried to close 3 accounts, he said. The education account, your household savings, and a small safe deposit account held jointly in your name and your daughter's. She doesn't have access to those. She presented a power of attorney. I stared at him. I never gave her one. He nodded toward the folder. That is why nothing has been released. The signature did not match the one we have on file. That should have comforted me. Instead, it told me Evelyn had prepared more than a funeral. Daniel had always called his mother decisive. Other people called her controlling, though never where she could hear them. She had managed the billing office of a private surgical practice for 28 years and believed every problem could be solved with the right form, the right phone call, or enough pressure applied to the right person. When Daniel became ill, her efficiency had seemed like mercy. She organized his medications, tracked insurance appeals, and drove Sophie to school when I was working overnight shifts. I was grateful enough that I stopped noticing how many decisions she made without asking me. After Daniel died, I let her remain deeply involved in our lives. Part of that was for Sophie. She had lost her father at 9 and clung to her grandmother's routines. Every Wednesday, Evelyn picked her up from school. Every Sunday, they made dinner together in Daniel's childhood home. Part of it was for me. I worked irregular hours, and I hated admitting that I needed help. That was my blind spot. I confused dependence with trust. Over the previous year, Evelyn had begun asking questions that felt practical at the time. Did I still keep Daniel's life insurance money at First Harbor? Who would manage Sophie's accounts if something happened during a flight? Had I updated my will? Once, she asked whether disaster response nurses carried identification tags when deployed. I laughed and told her I carried 2 forms of ID because paperwork survived things people did not. She did not laugh. The officer questioning me asked whether Evelyn had ever threatened me. No. Had you argued recently? I thought about our last conversation before I left. She had been angry because I refused to let Sophie transfer to a private academy near her house. Tuition was nearly $20,000 a year, and Evelyn insisted she could help pay. When I declined, she said, "You make every decision as if Daniel left you alone on purpose." I ended the call. 2 days later, I deployed. At the bank, the officer finally allowed me to use the desk phone. I called Sophie again. Her phone went directly to voicemail. Then I called Evelyn's house. A man answered. Mercer Residence. I recognized the voice as belonging to Reverend Paul Vance, the minister who had led my funeral. "This is Mara," I said. "Put Sophie on the phone." There was a pause. Then he whispered, "Evelyn told us you might call." My grip tightened around the receiver. "What did she tell you?" "That the accident caused a severe head injury. She said you might not understand what happened." Behind him, I heard a door close. Then Sophie's voice, distant but unmistakable. "Grandma, is Mom still pretending?" The line disconnected. I lowered the receiver and looked through the glass office wall. Evelyn was watching me. The officer beside her held the supposed power of attorney beneath the light. At the bottom of the page was the name of the notary who had verified my signature. It was dated 6 months earlier. On that exact day, I had been in the air over the Gulf of Mexico, transporting a cardiac patient to Houston, and Evelyn had been sitting beside Sophie at her school awards ceremony. Someone else had signed my name, but Evelyn had not done it alone. The police did not arrest Evelyn at the bank. The documents were suspicious, but suspicion was not enough. She claimed an attorney had prepared everything after receiving confirmation of my death from a hospital administrator. She said she had acted quickly because Sophie needed stability, and because my accounts might otherwise be frozen for months. When the officer asked about the transfer request dated before my accident, Evelyn studied the page and said, "That must be a clerical error." She delivered the lie without raising her voice. I nearly crossed the room. Instead, Mr. Feldman placed himself between us and reminded me that the accounts had been flagged. No funds could move until the bank's fraud department completed its review. It felt like a victory for less than a minute. Then the officer told me Sophie would remain at Evelyn's house until they confirmed there was no immediate risk to her. "I'm her mother, and according to the records presented today, you were declared dead," he said gently. "We need to establish what happened before we move a minor in the middle of the night." I understood procedure. I had spent years telling frightened families that verification protected patients. That did not make it easier to hear. Lila took me home. My front door key no longer worked. There were fresh scratches around the deadbolt, and a small silver security company sticker had been placed inside the window. Through the glass, I could see that the framed photograph of Daniel and Sophie was missing from the entry table. I called the police again. Because the house remained legally titled in my name, an officer stayed while a locksmith opened the door. Inside, the rooms looked familiar until I noticed what was absent. My flight uniforms were gone. So were my passport, laptop, tax files, jewelry box, and the binder containing Daniel's insurance records. Sophie's bedroom had been cleared of clothing and school supplies. Even the blanket she slept with after her father died had disappeared. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of sympathy cards. They had already been opened. I picked up one addressed to Sophie and found a $50 bill missing from the envelope. That small theft broke through the control I had been forcing on myself all afternoon. I swept the cards onto the floor. Lila did not tell me to calm down. She crouched beside me and began gathering them one at a time. "I should have called sooner," she said. "You believed I was dead. I believed something was wrong." She handed me a card with my name written in blue ink. Evelyn had people emptying this house before the funeral. She said the insurance company required an inventory. Who helped her? Her nephew. And the man from Daniel's old law office. Daniel had never worked at a law office, but his estate attorney had. I asked Lila to describe the man. Late 40s, narrow face, limp in his right leg. I knew him. Caleb Rourke had handled Daniel's will. 6 months earlier, he had called to say the firm was digitizing archived files and needed me to confirm my signature. I had refused to email identification and told him I would visit in person. He never followed up. That evening, against the officer's advice, I drove to Evelyn's house. It was my imperfect decision, made from fear rather than judgment. I parked across the street and called Sophie from Lila's phone. No answer. I tried again. A light appeared in the upstairs bedroom. A curtain moved, and Sophie's face emerged behind the glass. For 1 second, she stared at my car. Then she disappeared. Evelyn opened the front door less than a minute later. "You're frightening her," she called across the lawn. "I want to speak to my daughter. She watched us bury you today. You buried an empty box." Her expression shifted, not guilt, but exhaustion. "You were never there when she needed you," she said. "I'm doing what Daniel would have wanted." The porch light went dark behind her. Then my borrowed phone vibrated. A text had arrived from an unfamiliar number. "Mom, don't come inside. Grandma said, the police will take me away if I tell you about the blue envelope." Below the message was a photograph. Sophie had taken it from beneath her bedroom door. It showed a blue legal envelope lying open on the hallway floor. On the return label was Caleb Rourke's name, and handwritten across the front were 4 words, "Open after Mara is gone." I forwarded Sophie's photograph to the officer assigned to the bank complaint and drove away from Evelyn's house before anger persuaded me to do something reckless. Lila took me to a motel near the interstate. My home was technically mine, but I no longer knew who had keys, what had been removed, or whether Evelyn had installed cameras along with the new locks. The motel room smelled of industrial cleaner, and every time someone passed outside, I looked toward the door. At midnight, Sophie texted again. "The envelope is about Dad. Grandma said you hid money from him." I typed 3 different replies before sending the safest one. "Do not search for anything else. Do not argue with her. Keep your phone charged. I love you." The next morning, I called Andrea Chen, an attorney who had helped several members of my medical unit with guardianship documents before deployments. I showed her photographs of the false death certificate, the power of attorney, and the transfer request. She did not promise an arrest or immediate custody order. She gave me a list. First, document that I was alive through hospital discharge records, employment verification, and identification replacement paperwork. Second, obtain certified copies of every document Evelyn had presented. Third, stop contacting Evelyn directly. "You need facts more than explanations," Andrea told me. "And right now, every angry message you send can be shown to Sophie." That warning embarrassed me because I had almost sent several. Mr. Feldman arranged for the bank's fraud investigator to meet us that afternoon. Because my name appeared on the affected accounts, I was legally entitled to the transaction history and copies of documents submitted in connection with them. The records showed that someone had attempted to add Evelyn as an authorized signer 3 months earlier. The request had been rejected because it lacked an original signature from me. 2 weeks later, a new request arrived through Caleb Rourke's office. accompanied by the power of attorney. It had not been rejected immediately. It had been placed under review. That explained Evelyn's urgency at the bank. My supposed death would have allowed her to abandon the disputed authorization request and proceed as the representative of my estate. Andrea pointed to the notarization stamp. The notary was employed by the same surgical practice where Evelyn had managed billing. Her name was Denise Halpern. I remembered Denise as a quiet woman who brought casseroles during Daniel's illness. When the fraud investigator called her in our presence, Denise denied witnessing my signature. Then he read the commission number printed on the document. She stopped speaking. I reported that stamp missing last winter, she finally said. The state notary database confirmed her report, but the date raised another problem. Denise had waited 11 days after discovering the stamp was gone before notifying the licensing office. During those 11 days, Evelyn had been working her final week at the practice before retirement. The physician named on my death certificate had also worked there. Dr. Nathan Baird had left the state 4 years earlier. Andrea contacted the county vital records office while I sat beside her. No death certificate had been registered under my name. The document Evelyn presented was not a corrupted official record. It had been manufactured from a blank certificate template. Each discovery answered one question and created another. Evelyn knew medical billing, insurance language, and patient record systems. Caleb knew estate procedure. Someone had access to a missing notary stamp and an old physician's signature. But none of that explained how they knew my transport van would crash. I began to wonder whether the accident itself had been arranged. Andrea warned me not to make that accusation without evidence. She was right, but fear does not wait for evidence before entering your mind. That evening, Lila brought me a padded envelope recovered from beneath a cabinet in my kitchen. It had been overlooked when Evelyn's helpers emptied the house. Inside was the replacement tracking device for my medical flight bag. My employer had mailed it 3 months earlier after I reported the original unit malfunctioning. The activation record showed the original tracker had never failed. Someone had changed the account email and continued monitoring it. The final location alert had been opened from an internet address registered to Caleb's law office less than 20 minutes after my van crashed. They had not caused my disappearance, but they had been watching closely enough to use it before anyone knew whether I would survive. And according to the tracker history, Caleb had been monitoring more than my deployment. He had followed my movements for 76 days. The tracking records gave Andrea enough to request an emergency hearing concerning Sophie, but not enough to remove her from Evelyn's house that morning. Caleb's office argued that the location data had been collected for estate planning after I named him as a legal advisor. I had never done that, but his explanation created the kind of dispute that required records, testimony, and time. Evelyn used that time better than I did. By noon, my medical director called. "Mara, I need you to stay away from the airfield until we complete a fitness review." I stood beside the motel window, watching Lila carry coffee across the parking lot. "A fitness review for what?" He hesitated. "We received medical documentation indicating you experienced confusion, memory loss, and aggressive behavior after the collision. From whom? I can't discuss the source yet." I already knew. The documents described me as leaving the hospital against medical advice, refusing psychiatric observation, and appearing unexpectedly at my own memorial service in a disoriented state. Attached was a statement from Evelyn claiming that I had frightened Sophie and threatened to remove her from a safe home. Most of it was false. One detail was not. I had left the hospital before a neurologist completed the recommended follow-up examination. I had been desperate to get home, and the discharge nurse had recorded my refusal. That single fact made the rest sound possible. My flight status was suspended pending evaluation. Without active status, I lost my disaster response assignment and the additional pay attached to it. More important, I lost the one place where I still felt competent. For years, I had walked into wrecked vehicles, flooded clinics, and unstable aircraft knowing exactly what my role was. Now, people were discussing whether I could be trusted to make decisions about my own child. Andrea warned me that Evelyn's attorney had also filed for temporary guardianship. The petition claimed my neurological condition made me unpredictable and that Sophie had developed severe anxiety at the thought of returning home. They included a voicemail, Andrea said. She played it through her laptop. My own voice filled the motel room. "Evelyn, if you keep my daughter from me, I swear I will tear apart everything you have built. I remembered leaving the message weeks earlier, after our argument about the private academy. The full recording had continued. I mean the lies, the pressure, all of it. Sophie is not another problem for you to manage. That part had been removed. The shortened version sounded like a threat. I called Sophie's school and asked to speak with the counselor. The receptionist placed me on hold, then returned with a careful tone. Mrs. Mercer provided documentation indicating she is Sophie's temporary guardian. We've been advised not to release information until the court clarifies custody. She is not Sophie's guardian. I'm sorry, I can't discuss this further. The call ended. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my lap. My house had been emptied. My daughter was afraid to speak to me. My professional clearance was gone. The people who had falsified my death were now using my survival as proof that I was unstable. For the first time, I wondered whether Evelyn had been right about one thing. I had left too much of Sophie's life in her hands. Lila placed the coffee beside me and said nothing. That kindness nearly undid me. An hour later, Sophie's hidden number sent a 7-second audio message. Evelyn's voice was faint but recognizable. Once the court signs the guardianship, the account becomes available. Caleb said the school payment can cover the rest. A man answered only if Mara reacts the way we expect. The recording ended. Andrea listened twice. It helps, she said, but we need the original file and proof of when it was made. I can post everything, I said. The funeral program, the forged certificate, the tracking log. People will know what she did, and Evelyn will say an injured woman is attacking a grieving grandmother online. I looked at the photograph of my empty casket. Public anger would feel like action. Quiet preparation felt like surrender. By evening, I had written a statement naming Evelyn and Caleb and accusing them of fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy. My finger rested over the button that would send it to every local reporter whose address Lila could find. Then Andrea placed a printed court notice beside my phone. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for 12 days later. I deleted the statement. If they were waiting for me to explode, I would give them something far more dangerous. Time to become confident. The first person to weaken Evelyn's story was the woman whose notary stamp appeared on my forged signature. Denise Halpern called Andrea 2 days after the bank interview and asked to meet somewhere Evelyn would not see her. We chose a conference room inside Andrea's office. Denise arrived carrying a grocery bag filled with appointment calendars, retirement paperwork, and printed emails from the surgical practice. She kept both hands around a paper cup she never drank from. Evelyn did take my stamp, she said. But she gave it back. When? Andrea asked. Before I reported it missing. I leaned forward. Then why report it? Because Caleb told me it had already been used. The room seemed to narrow around his name. Denise explained that Caleb had visited the practice repeatedly during Evelyn's final month of employment. He claimed he was updating Daniel's estate plan and needed copies of old billing records to resolve an insurance dispute. Denise had seen him alone in Evelyn's office twice. She believed you were draining Sophie's inheritance, Denise said to me. Caleb showed her statements. What statements? Transfers from Daniel's trust. I looked at Andrea. Daniel had created a protected trust for Sophie during the final months of his illness. Most of his life insurance proceeds went into it. I was the acting trustee, but Caleb's firm handled annual filings and investment reports. For the first year, I reviewed every page. Then the statements became reminders of hospital rooms, hospice forms, and conversations Daniel and I never had enough time to finish. I began signing the acknowledgement pages without reading the full reports. Eventually, I stopped opening them at all. That was not Evelyn's fault or Caleb's. It was mine. Andrea requested the complete trust ledger from Caleb's former law firm. Because I was the named trustee, the firm's managing partner released the archived records after confirming my identity and learning that Caleb was under a bank fraud review. The authentic ledger showed no withdrawals by me. The statements Evelyn had seen were altered copies. They made it appear that I had transferred nearly $90,000 into accounts under my maiden name. Caleb had also shown her an unsigned memorandum, supposedly written by Daniel, asking that Evelyn protect Sophie if my work became more important than being a mother. Daniel had never written those words, but Evelyn had wanted to believe them. It allowed her resentment to feel like duty. The deeper problem was inside a document added to the file 6 months earlier. It named Caleb as successor trustee if I died or became medically incapacitated. It also allowed Sophie's legal guardian to request education and housing payments without additional court approval. My signature appeared at the bottom. Denise's stamp appeared beside it. The private academy was not merely a school Evelyn preferred. Its enrollment deposit would have created the first qualifying request under the forged amendment. The payment was scheduled to pass through an educational consulting company incorporated by Caleb's brother-in-law. They weren't trying to steal only what was in the bank, Andrea said. They were trying to establish control over the trust. The balance was more than $600,000. I had spent days thinking Evelyn had built the entire plan. Now I saw something more complicated. She had chosen to hold the funeral. She had lied to Sophie. She had entered my home and tried to take my accounts. But Caleb had built the machinery. He had fed her grief, her fear of losing her granddaughter, and her oldest belief that Daniel had trusted her more than he trusted me. Then Andrea found a handwritten note in the archive file. It had been made by Caleb's former assistant after a telephone call 3 months earlier. Client asked whether same incapacity amendment can be used for 2 other family trusts. Advised no documents should be prepared without trustees present. 2 other trusts. This had not begun with my accident and it might not end with my family. Before we could contact the firm's managing partner, Andrea received an electronic notice from probate court. Caleb had filed an emergency petition to remove me as Sophie's trustee. Attached was a neurological evaluation claiming I suffered permanent cognitive impairment. The doctor's signature belonged to a man who had never examined me. The hearing was in 48 hours. The emergency hearing did not clear my name. It only prevented Caleb from taking control of Sophie's trust before the larger guardianship dispute could be heard. Andrea presented my hospital discharge records, the county's confirmation that no valid death certificate existed, and the bank's fraud hold. Caleb's attorney argued that none of those documents proved I remained mentally capable of managing a trust. The judge declined to remove me as trustee without an independent medical evaluation. She also prohibited any withdrawals, amendments, or new beneficiaries until the next hearing. For a few hours, I thought we had won something important. Then I read the final paragraph of the temporary order. Sophie would remain with Evelyn. My contact with her would be limited to 1 supervised video call each evening. The court was protecting the money more quickly than it protected my relationship with my daughter. I understood why. Money left records. Fear did not. During our first supervised call, Sophie sat at Evelyn's dining table with a court-appointed family services coordinator beside her. Her hair was unwashed, and she kept pulling the sleeves of her sweatshirt over her hands. "You look tired," I said. "I'm fine. Are you sleeping?" Evelyn moved somewhere beyond the camera. Sophie's eyes followed her. "I sleep." The coordinator asked whether she wanted to tell me anything about school. Sophie shook her head. Before the call ended, she leaned closer to the screen. "Mom, did Dad really say Grandma should take care of me?" "No," the answer came too quickly and too sharply. Sophie flinched. I softened my voice. "Your father loved you. He also trusted me to raise you." Evelyn spoke from outside the camera's view. "That is your interpretation." The coordinator ended the call. For the next 10 days, my life became a collection of appointments and labeled folders. A neurologist completed cognitive testing and found no permanent impairment. My medical director received the report but said the employment review would remain open until the custody allegations were resolved. Andrea obtained the full voicemail from my phone provider. The original lasted 18 seconds, not the 7 seconds Caleb had submitted. A forensic audio specialist documented the edit points and confirmed that the court version had been exported through software licensed to Caleb's office. The hospital where I had been treated also located its original electronic notes. I had declined a neurological consultation, but I had not refused psychiatric care because none had been recommended. The altered report used the name of a physician who worked in a different department and had never seen me. Denise turned over an email Caleb had sent her months earlier. He asked whether a notary could correct a missed signing date when the signer was unavailable. Denise had replied that the document would need to be signed again in her presence. Caleb answered with 2 words, "Understood. Thanks." The forged amendment appeared 3 days later. The strongest evidence still came from Sophie's recording, but using it created a problem. To authenticate the file, Sophie might have to explain how she made it and whether anyone had pressured her. I did not want my daughter placed between adults who had already used her fear as leverage. Andrea asked the court to appoint an attorney specifically for Sophie. That attorney met with her privately twice. We were not told what Sophie said. On the ninth day, Caleb requested a settlement meeting. He arrived without Evelyn. He offered to withdraw the petition, resign from every role connected to the trust, and return all copied records if I agreed not to pursue claims against him or report Denise's stamp to law enforcement. What happens to Evelyn? I asked. She keeps temporary guardianship while you complete treatment. I don't require treatment. His expression remained almost sympathetic. Mara, even if you win, Sophie will remember that you destroyed the only grandmother she has left. For one painful second, the argument reached me. Winning would not restore the funeral Sophie had attended. It would not erase the days she believed her mother was dead, or the nights she had been taught to fear my return. I looked at Caleb and wondered whether public exposure would heal anything. Then Andrea placed the altered medical report beside his settlement offer. You have until 5 tomorrow afternoon, she said. Withdraw every false filing and provide a complete accounting. Caleb stood. You think Evelyn is the one your daughter is afraid of, he said. You should ask what Sophie heard the night before the funeral. At 4:58 the next afternoon, Andrea received his response. He was not withdrawing. Attached was a new affidavit signed by Evelyn, stating that Sophie had personally asked never to live with me again. The decisive hearing began the following morning. As Andrea and I waited outside the courtroom, Sophie arrived holding Evelyn's hand. She looked at me, then at the leather document case Evelyn carried against her chest. It was the same case from the bank. And through a gap near the broken zipper, I saw the corner of a small black voice recorder Daniel had used during chemotherapy appointments. Sophie did not release Evelyn's hand when they passed me outside the courtroom, but her eyes moved toward the broken zipper of Daniel's leather case. Then she looked at her court-appointed attorney, Miss Bell. It was deliberate, Miss Bell noticed. Before testimony began, she asked the judge for permission to speak privately with Sophie. Evelyn's attorney objected, claiming the request would increase Sophie's anxiety. But the judge reminded him that Miss Bell represented Sophie, not either adult. The hearing paused for 23 minutes. When everyone returned, Sophie was no longer seated beside Evelyn. She sat behind Miss Bell with the Family Services Coordinator. Daniel's leather case rested on the evidence table. Miss Bell stood. My client placed a recording device inside that case this morning. She says it contains a conversation from the night before the funeral. Evelyn turned toward Sophie. You went through my things? Sophie lowered her head. The judge stopped Evelyn before she could say more. Because the recording had not previously been disclosed, Andrea did not ask for it to be played immediately. She requested that the device be copied by a court-approved technician and that Sophie establish how the recording was made. The judge agreed and recessed until afternoon. During the break, Sophie spoke with Miss Bell while the technician created an identical digital copy and documented the recorder's serial number, file date, and unedited duration. The file lasted 11 minutes and 14 seconds. When court resumed, Miss Bell asked Sophie only necessary questions. Did anyone tell you to make this recording? No, why did you do it? I heard Grandma say Mom might come back. A movement passed through the room. Sophie continued. She said if Mom came back, they had to make people think she was sick. I remembered Dad's recorder was in the desk. Did you edit the recording? No. Where did you keep it? Inside the lining of Grandpa's old document case. Grandma didn't know the lining was torn. The judge allowed the recording to be played for the limited purpose of considering guardianship and Sophie's immediate safety. Any criminal use would require a separate investigation. At first, there was only the scrape of furniture. Then Caleb's voice emerged. The bank won't release anything without either a registered certificate or the guardianship order. Evelyn answered, You said the certificate would be enough. I said it would create pressure. The incapacity claim is cleaner if Mara appears after everyone has accepted she's dead. And if she doesn't come back, then the estate process continues. There was a long pause on the recording. Evelyn's next words were quieter. I don't want Sophie hurt. She already thinks her mother chose work over her. Give her something definite to grieve. Evelyn said, Daniel would hate this. Caleb replied, Daniel is the reason you're doing it. The final minutes captured them discussing the funeral program, the edited voicemail, and the plan to describe any return by me as post-accident confusion. Caleb never admitted causing the crash. He did not need to. The case before the court was no longer based on competing interpretations of my behavior. The recording showed that my supposed instability had been prepared in advance. Caleb's attorney asked for a recess. The judge denied it and called Evelyn to testify. Andrea approached carefully. "Did you know Mara was confirmed dead when you arranged the funeral?" Evelyn stared at the recorder. "No. Did you tell Sophie she was?" "Yes. Why?" Her voice broke for the first time. "Because Caleb showed me the trust statements. He said Mara had taken Daniel's money and would take Sophie away when she discovered we knew. You entered her home?" "Yes." "You removed her records?" "Yes." "You presented a false death certificate?" I believed Caleb had obtained it legally. Andrea placed the transfer request before her. "This was prepared before the accident." Evelyn closed her eyes. "I signed what he gave me." Caleb was then questioned about the altered trust statements, the tracking account, and the edited voicemail. He denied creating the death certificate and claimed Evelyn had misunderstood hypothetical legal advice. Andrea handed him Denise's email. "You asked whether a notary could correct signing date." "For another matter." "Which matter?" "I don't recall." "Was it one of the two other family trusts mentioned in your former assistant's note?" His attorney objected. The judge sustained the objection because those trusts were outside the immediate proceeding. But Caleb had already hesitated, and everyone had seen it. The judge did not deliver a speech. She issued orders. Evelyn's temporary guardianship was terminated. Sophie was to return to me under a short transition plan recommended by her attorney. Evelyn could have no unsupervised contact until a full family assessment was completed. Caleb was removed from every role connected to Sophie's trust. The Fourth Amendment was suspended, and all related documents were referred to the bank's investigators, the state bar, and the appropriate law enforcement agencies. Then the judge looked at Sophie. "You are not responsible for what the adults in this room chose to do." Sophie began crying without making a sound. I wanted to cross the room and hold her. She was not ready. But when the coordinator led her past me, she stopped and placed Daniel's recorder in my hand. "I knew you weren't pretending," she whispered. It was the first time she had called me Mom without fear in nearly 3 weeks. Sophie did not return home with me that afternoon. The transition plan required 2 nights in a temporary family services apartment, followed by daytime visits at our house before she resumed living there full-time. I hated the delay, but when I saw how tightly she held Miss Bell's sleeve outside the courthouse, I understood. Removing her from Evelyn's control did not automatically return her sense of safety. The bank's investigation moved faster after the hearing. Evelyn's access requests were formally denied, and every account connected to Daniel's estate was restricted until an independent trustee could review the records. Caleb resigned from his law firm before its partners could vote to remove him. It did not protect him. The firm discovered altered statements in 2 other family trust files. Those clients were contacted, and the state bar opened a disciplinary case. Investigators also obtained the computer Caleb had used to edit my voicemail and create the false medical documents. No one led him away from the courthouse in handcuffs. That would have been satisfying in a simpler story. Instead, he entered months of interviews, subpoenas, license proceedings, and financial audits. The district attorney's office later filed charges related to forgery, attempted theft, and fraudulent court documents. His attorney argued that Evelyn had supplied some of the information and that no money had actually left Sophie's trust. The case remained unresolved for a long time. Justice, I learned, often begins as paperwork. Evelyn faced different consequences. The funeral home demanded payment for the service she had arranged using false information. My homeowner's insurer rejected part of my claim because she had entered the house with a key I had previously given her. She was ordered to return everything removed from my home and provide a complete inventory. Some items came back in labeled boxes. Others did not. Daniel's watch was missing. So was the bracelet Sophie had worn to her father's memorial service. Evelyn claimed she had never seen either one. I could not prove otherwise. The family assessment recommended supervised visitation only after Evelyn completed counseling and acknowledged that the funeral had harmed Sophie. For several weeks, she refused. She called herself another victim of Caleb's manipulation. There was truth in that. There was also cowardice. Caleb had deceived her, but he had not forced her to tell a 15-year-old girl that her mother was dead. He had not forced her to empty my house or stand inside a bank with a false certificate. Evelyn had made choices because those choices confirmed what she already wanted to believe about me. My flight status was restored after the medical review cleared me, but I did not immediately return to disaster deployments. I accepted a temporary training assignment at the regional base, teaching emergency stabilization procedures to new flight nurses. The work paid less. It kept me close to Sophie. On her first afternoon back at our house, she stopped in the doorway and stared at the empty space where our family photograph had once stood. "I thought Grandma was selling the house," she said. She tried to prepare it for that. Sophie placed her backpack on the floor but did not go upstairs. "Did you know I believed her?" "I know. Are you mad at me?" That question hurt more than anything said in court. I sat on the bottom stair, leaving enough distance for her to choose whether to come closer. "No. You were told something frightening by someone you trusted." "I said you were pretending. You were trying to understand something that made no sense." She looked toward the kitchen. "I helped choose the funeral picture. I could not make that confession harmless, so I did not try. I'm sorry they made you do that." She sat beside me, not touching me at first. Then her shoulder leaned against mine. "Evelyn requested one supervised meeting before beginning counseling. Sophie agreed only if I remained in the building." Through the observation window, I watched Evelyn place Daniel's leather case on the table between them. "I thought I was protecting you," she told Sophie. Sophie looked at the broken zipper. "You were protecting what you wanted to believe." Evelyn lowered her eyes. For once, she did not argue. Afterward, she asked to speak to me in the hallway. "I loved my son," she said. "So did I. I believed you were taking away what he left. You helped someone try to take away the person he left Sophie with." Her face tightened, but the anger did not fully arrive. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't." The honesty seemed to relieve her and wound her at the same time. I walked away before either of us could turn the moment into something easier than it was. That evening, Sophie and I unpacked the return boxes. At the bottom of the final one, beneath folded uniforms and unopened sympathy cards, we found the framed photograph that had disappeared from the entry table. The glass was cracked across Daniel's face. Sophie reached for it. "Can we replace the glass?" "Yes," I said. But neither of us pretended that replacing it would make the photograph untouched again. 4 months later, Sophie and I stood at the counter of a frame shop while an employee replaced the cracked glass over our family photograph. She lifted the picture carefully by its edges. "Do you want the original frame cleaned too?" she asked. Sophie looked at me before answering. "No," she said. "Leave the scratches." The woman nodded without asking why. Our house had become ours again slowly. At first, Sophie slept with her bedroom door open and the hallway light on. She checked my work schedule every morning and asked what time I would return, even on days when I was only teaching at the airfield. I stopped saying, "You don't have to worry." She did worry. Pretending otherwise would only teach her to hide it. Instead, I wrote my schedule on a board beside the refrigerator. When plans changed, I called her myself. I learned that reliability was not something I could ask her to believe in. It was something I had to repeat until her body stopped preparing for another disappearance. My medical director eventually restored my full flight clearance. I accepted occasional patient transports but declined long disaster deployments for the rest of the school year. That decision cost me money and slowed the career path I had spent years building. I did not regret it. Sophie began seeing a therapist who specialized in traumatic grief. Some weeks she spoke about the funeral. Other weeks she discussed school, friends, or the way Evelyn had made ordinary questions feel like tests of loyalty. She did not visit Evelyn for nearly 2 months. When supervised contact resumed, Sophie set the conditions with help from her attorney and therapist. Evelyn could not discuss the trust, Caleb, my parenting, or Daniel's supposed wishes. During their third visit, Evelyn finally said the words Sophie had been waiting to hear. "I knew there was a chance your mother was alive, and I held the funeral anyway." She did not add that Caleb manipulated her. She did not say she had only wanted to protect Sophie. For once, she allowed the truth to remain unprotected. Sophie did not forgive her that day. She asked to leave early, but afterward she said, "At least she stopped making me explain it for her." Caleb lost his license to practice law while the criminal case continued. He eventually pleaded guilty to several fraud-related charges in exchange for the dismissal of others. Restitution was ordered for the families whose trust records he had altered, though recovering the full amount would take years. Evelyn was not imprisoned. She entered a civil settlement requiring her to repay the money spent from my household accounts, surrender every remaining key and copy of my records, and have no involvement in Sophie's finances. Some people believed that was not enough. I stopped measuring justice by how much suffering returned to the people who caused ours. The trust was placed under the management of an independent fiduciary. Every statement now came to both me and a separate accountant. I read every page. One Saturday morning, Sophie found the funeral program in the back of my desk drawer. She held it by one corner, as though it might stain her fingers. "Why did you keep this?" I looked at the photograph Evelyn had chosen, the official portrait of me in my flight uniform, smiling with the careful confidence people use for professional pictures. For months, I had avoided looking at it, because destroying it wouldn't undo what happened. Sophie turned the program over. The back page contained a passage about rest, remembrance, and leaving behind the people we loved. "Can I write on it?" she asked. I gave her a pen. Beneath the false date of my death, she drew a single line. Then she wrote the date I had walked into First Harbor Bank. Next to it, she added, "The day Mom came home." We placed the program behind the repaired family photograph, where no visitor could see it. The scratches remained on the frame. The line across Daniel's face was gone, but the wood still carried the marks left by the fall. That felt honest. Our family had not returned to what it was before the funeral. Sophie trusted more carefully. I worked differently. Evelyn occupied a smaller, supervised place in our lives. Daniel's memory no longer belonged to whoever spoke about him most confidently. And every evening when I returned from the airfield, I called through the front door before setting down my keys. "I'm home." At first, Sophie always answered immediately. Eventually, she stopped needing to. If this story stayed with you, tell me which moment changed the way you saw Evelyn's choices. And if you value stories about family betrayal, quiet courage, and justice built through patience rather than revenge, you're welcome to join me for the next one.